This case has just taken a turn no one saw coming. The courtroom tension around Blake Lively's lawsuit has reached a boiling point, and what happened last night could change everything forever. The legal walls are closing in, and now even the judge is stepping in personally to stop the chaos. The air around this case feels heavier than ever because something about the timing of what Blake Lively's attorneys just did screams panic and desperation. It's not just a routine filing or another motion tossed into the pile. This one feels different. It feels like a last-ditch effort to stop something big from blowing up in her face. And when you read between the lines of her attorney's new request, you start to see what she's really afraid of, that this case might actually get tossed out completely, and that her entire narrative could collapse in front of everyone last night. After weeks of silence, her legal team suddenly filed a new motion, begging the court to deny Wayfarer's motion for judgment on the pleadings, calling it untimely. But the more you read it, the more it feels like they're trying to stall for time. And that's where the tension really starts to rise. They claim the defendants waited too long to file, but their own filings tell a different story because it's clear from the record that the pleadings only just closed a few weeks ago. And by law, you can't even file a judgment on pleadings until that point. So the argument that it's too late doesn't really hold up. What it sounds like instead is that Blake's side wasn't ready and maybe never expected this motion to hit when it did. So now they're scrambling to slow everything down and buy themselves a month to prepare a defense. And that's where the story takes a wild turn, because her lawyers didn't just ask the judge to deny the motion, they asked for something much stranger. They asked that if the judge won't deny it right away, to at least delay their response for nearly a month, which is practically unheard of in a case this active. It's a move that signals one thing: they're scared they don't have the answers ready, and they're hoping time will somehow fix that. The filing is written in a tone that almost sounds like pleading, saying that forcing her to respond now would waste resources and cause unnecessary burden. But when you really dig into it, that logic falls apart, because this is exactly how federal procedure works. Every motion has a timeline, every response has a deadline, and every party knows when those dates are coming. Yet they act as if this was a surprise attack, when in reality, it's just the normal rhythm of litigation. They go on to argue that the Wayfarer defendants have been sitting on these arguments for 9 months, which sounds suspicious until you realize that Blake filed multiple versions of her complaint. First in December, then again in February, and again on July 30th this year. Meaning the pleadings didn't even close until after the summer, so their claim of delay doesn't hold up under the timeline. It's actually the exact opposite. The defendants waited until it was legally appropriate to file the motion, and they did so within a standard window. So when Blake's side tells the judge this is unfair, it starts to look more like deflection than a real procedural problem, because what they're truly afraid of is not timing, it's substance. They know that this motion goes right to the heart of whether her claims are even legally allowed to exist in the first place. And that's what makes this part so explosive. A judgment on pleadings is not about evidence or facts, it's about law. It's about whether the claims themselves make sense under the rules and statutes that govern them. So when the defendants move for judgment on the pleadings, they're saying, even if everything Blake claims is true, the law still doesn't support her lawsuit. And that's the kind of argument that can end a case instantly. It doesn't require testimony or discovery or expert reports. It's purely legal, and that's why Blake's team is panicking, because they can't fix a bad pleading with more evidence if the law doesn't allow. The claim, no amount of proof matters, and you can feel that fear all over their response. They spend entire pages talking about evidence that hasn't even been presented yet, saying she has new proof that supports her claims. But this stage of litigation isn't about evidence, it's about whether the complaint itself is valid. If the claims don't fit within the law, no evidence can save them. That's how federal courts work, and deep down they know that's exactly what's being tested here. So instead of arguing the merits of the motion directly, they turn it into an argument about timing, fairness, and convenience, which to any seasoned observer looks like an attempt to shift focus away from the real issue. And that's exactly what caught the judge's attention, because only hours after this filing went live, the judge issued an order of his own, and that's where things get even more interesting. Initially, he had given Wayfarer until tomorrow to file their response. But then, he changed everything. Instead of letting the lawyers argue this through letters and filings, he ordered an immediate hearing on the matter. A live hearing to take place on October 3rd at 2 p.m. through Microsoft Teams with a public dial-in for the press and media, meaning this will all unfold in real time with transparency for everyone watching. That's a rare move. And it sends a clear message that the judge sees this as serious. He's not brushing it aside or letting either party play games on the docket. He's calling them into court to talk face to face, which suggests he's taking the motion very seriously, and he's not going to let Blake's team use delay tactics to dodge the hard questions that are now in front of them. Because at the center of all of this are three massive issues that could decide the fate of her case. First, did she properly exhaust her administrative remedies before filing? Meaning, did she actually get the right to sue notice that federal law requires? Second, does she even have standing to claim damages under the statutes she's invoking? And third, did she properly plead retaliation in a way that qualifies under employment law? Because if any of those answers is no, this entire lawsuit could crumble. And that's what makes the judge's decision to call a hearing so significant. He's signaling that he wants to cut through the noise and get to the core of what really matters: the law itself. The motion for judgment on the pleadings isn't about dragging this case out. It's about clarifying whether the claims can even survive under federal rules. And if they can't, it's better to end it now, rather than waste months on discovery and trial preparation that would lead nowhere. But the part that's truly fascinating is how Blake's filing keeps circling back to one emotional theme: that she has evidence now that she didn't before, that she can prove everything she's claimed. But that misses the point entirely, because if the case isn't legally sound, she could have mountains of evidence and it still wouldn't matter. The law sets the boundaries, not the drama, not the emotion, and certainly not public perception. And yet the tone of her filing reads almost like an emotional appeal to fairness, as if asking the judge to give her one more chance to rewrite her story and bring new allegations to light, even though discovery is over and deadlines have passed. The pattern here is undeniable when cornered. Her strategy has always been to expand the playing field, to reopen, to reframe, to amend, but the rules of civil procedure don't bend that easily. And every time she's tried to stretch them, the court has pushed back, reminding her that deadlines exist. For a reason, this is no longer about narrative, it's about law, and what happens next will determine whether this case goes forward or ends right here in the pre-trial stage, because if the judge agrees that her claims were improperly filed or legally unsound, that's it. It's over, and that's exactly why she's terrified, and that fear is written in every line of this document. Even though it never says it outright, the timing, the tone, the request for mercy instead of argument, it all points to one chilling truth. Blake Lively may know that she's running out of moves. And when the judge called for that live hearing, it wasn't just a procedural update. It was a signal that he's ready to cut through the performance and see what's really underneath the legal facade. And the question now hanging over Hollywood is, what will happen when that courtroom door opens on October 3rd? Will this be the moment everything changes, or the day her case collapses right in front of her eyes? The pressure around this courtroom drama has reached an unbearable peak, because as October 3rd approaches, every side is bracing for impact, and what's unfolding behind the scenes feels less like a quiet legal process and more like a countdown. To detonation, Blake Lively's attorneys have gone into overdrive, trying to shape the narrative before the hearing begins, and their new filings show that they're pulling every lever they can find to slow things down and change the framing of this motion. Their strategy seems to rely on one key point: that the defendants waited too long to bring this motion, and that doing so now somehow hurts her ability to defend herself. But that logic falls apart under scrutiny, because the record clearly shows that the pleadings only recently closed, meaning that Wayfarer's timing was entirely proper under the law. So the question isn't whether it was too late, but rather what they're afraid will happen if the court actually looks at this motion on its merits. Because what's at stake isn't just a delay. It's the possibility that the entire case could be dismissed on purely legal grounds. And that's the nightmare scenario for her team. If the judge decides that her claims don't survive the law, then everything else, evidence, discovery, witness lists, all of it becomes meaningless, and that's what has everyone whispering that the panic in her latest filings isn't about time, it's about survival. You can sense it between the lines when they start talking about the need to bring in more evidence, about how she's gathered new facts, and how she might need to amend her complaint again to include them. But discovery has already closed, and the judge made that clear on September 30th, meaning she can't just start over and introduce new facts now. So the mention of amendment feels like a desperate attempt to keep the door open, just in case her current pleadings fail. And that's exactly what this motion tests. Because judgment on the pleadings is not about what might be discovered later, it's about what's already on paper. If the legal foundation is cracked, the case can't stand. And that's why this motion is such a threat. And The tone of her filing shows she knows it deep down. Instead of meeting the motion head-on with counter-arguments of law, she pivots into procedural protests about fairness, burden, and scheduling, all while subtly asking the judge for sympathy. It's a pattern that legal analysts have noticed throughout the case. When her team is on the defensive, they focus on emotion rather than statute. And now that strategy might be running out of road, because this judge isn't treating the issue like noise. He's pulled it into a live hearing with transparency for the public and the press, which means every move will be under scrutiny and no one will be able to hide behind redacted filings or sealed motions. This is open courtroom confrontation, and that's why the stakes are so high, not just for Blake, but for everyone watching, because this is the first time the judge himself has stepped in to demand direct answers. Instead of written excuses, it's a bold move, and it signals that he's not convinced by her team's narrative. He wants facts and he wants clarity. And when a judge reaches that point, it's usually not good for the party asking for delays, but the most shocking part is what her team wrote in the footnotes of their filing, because hidden in those small lines is an admission that could come back to haunt them. They mention a right to sue letter from the California Civil Rights Department claiming it proves she's exhausted her administrative remedies, but that claim doesn't line up with the public record. Because as sources who reviewed her initial KRD filing have pointed out, the agency closed her case the same day she filed it, meaning she couldn't amend it later, and under California law, once a CRD complaint is closed, it can't be reopened. She would have had to file a brand new one and provide that notice to Wayfarer. And there's no sign that ever happened, and if it didn't happen, her whole foundation for the employment and retaliation claims could be invalid from the start. That's why this one detail about the right to sue letter is so explosive. It's not just a paperwork issue, it's a question of jurisdiction. If the right to sue applies only to California cases, then bringing it to a federal court in New York could be a fatal mistake. And that's exactly what Wayfarer's lawyers are arguing, that the California right to sue has no extraterritorial reach, meaning it can't be used to file a case across state lines. And if the judge agrees that one ruling could unravel everything in her complaint, and that might be the real reason her team is trying so hard to delay, because they know once the court reaches that issue, there's no easy fix, and it's not something she can rewrite in another amendment. This is structural. It goes to the legal core of the case, and that's where the suspense builds. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that this is not about technicalities. It's about whether the lawsuit itself was built on a foundation that doesn't hold up under federal standards. And the judge has now made it clear that he's going to decide that question fast. By setting an immediate hearing, he's signaling that he won't let this linger. He wants answers in real time, and that's bad news for any side that was hoping to stall, because once those questions are asked live, there's no room for vague answers or emotional appeals. And that's why the next few days feel like a storm. Building over Hollywood, everyone is watching and whispering, because this hearing could determine whether Blake's case survives or ends abruptly. And even though she's known for her composure, this kind of public scrutiny is something entirely different. The judge's decision to allow a public dial-in means journalists and legal analysts will be listening in as every argument is made, every hesitation, every pause, every tone shift. It will all be heard and dissected. And that transparency might be exactly what the court wants to restore trust in a case that has felt clouded by speculation and drama for months. The irony is that Blake herself once positioned this lawsuit as a fight for truth, for accountability. But now that same transparency could turn against her, because the public will hear exactly how her team defends these procedural issues, and whether they truly have the legal footing they claim. The courtroom is becoming the stage. But this time, there's no script, no director, and no reshoot. The words said in that hearing will decide the direction of the entire case, and everyone knows it. And behind all the filings and footnotes, there's a deeper layer of tension about what this case means for Hollywood. As a whole, the combination of celebrity status, high-stakes allegations, and the internet's obsession with this feud has turned it into something bigger than just one legal battle. It's now a test of how much truth can survive when fame, power, and legal precision collide. And with every filing, Blake's team seems to edge closer to the edge of that cliff, because the more they argue about timing and fairness, the more they avoid the one question that matters: do her claims hold up under the law? The defendants are framing this as a necessary step to save time and resources by clarifying the legal issues now before trial. And it's hard to argue with that logic. If the pleadings aren't sound, it's better to address it early than waste months preparing for a case that can't legally proceed. But Blake's team frames it as an ambush, an unfair surprise timed to disrupt their discovery work. Yet that narrative only works if the judge believes that Wayfarer acted with bad faith. And so far, nothing in the record suggests that they did. which means that when the hearing begins, it may come down to how convincingly each side can argue their definition of fairness. Because while Blake's attorneys will argue emotion, in timing, Wayfarer's counsel will rely on pure law, and that contrast could be devastating in a federal court where precision matters more than passion. This is the turning point, the moment where one wrong argument could end it all, and that's why everyone's eyes are on October 3rd, because once the judge starts asking questions, there will be no hiding from the truth. The air around this case feels heavier now, like every sentence spoken in that courtroom will carry the weight of months of speculation and hidden tension. And the more you look at how each side is maneuvering, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just a legal dispute. It's a high-stakes chess match, where every move is calculated to shape the public narrative as much as the legal one. Blake Lively's team knows that the motion for judgment on the pleadings isn't just a procedural hurdle. It's an existential threat if the judge grants it. The case doesn't just weaken, it collapses completely, and that would be the kind of public embarrassment that no PR team can spin away. So they've shifted their energy toward reframing the story, presenting Blake as the victim of a rushed process, a misunderstood timeline, and a system stacked against her. But behind that emotional framing lies the cold truth that timing isn't the real issue. The law is, and the law is not bending. In her favor, what makes this even more dramatic is how the judge himself seems aware of the external pressure this case has drawn, from social media coverage to Hollywood's internal whispers. He knows everyone is waiting for a signal of where the truth might land, and that's why his decision to make this hearing public is being seen as a power move, a statement that he won't let either side hide behind sealed documents or selective leaks. And for the first time, both legal teams are being forced to argue not just for the court, but for the court of public opinion too. Because this time the audience is real, and the reaction will be instant. That's what's terrifying Blake's camp most, because their narrative control is slipping, and the facts are beginning to speak louder than their spin. The documents filed show inconsistencies, small but glaring ones, especially when it comes to how she described her employment history, with Wayfarer and the timeline of the alleged misconduct. The more analysts examine it, the more contradictions appear, and that's exactly what the defense is likely to highlight. When the hearing opens, they'll argue that even taking her claims as true, they don't form a valid legal cause of action under federal law. And that's a devastating argument, because it means the court doesn't even have to decide who's telling the truth, just whether the law recognizes what she's alleging as something it can adjudicate. If the answer is no, the case dies before it even reaches discovery. And that's the nightmare her lawyers are trying to avoid. The filings also hint at another major problem: the overlap between this case and her previous legal claims. The defense has suggested that she's recycling allegations from older filings under different names and agencies, trying to repackage them for this case. And if the court sees it that way, it could interpret her actions as bad faith, or at least as an attempt to manipulate venue, rules, and procedural advantages that would destroy her credibility, not just in this courtroom, but in any future litigation. And that's the kind of reputational damage that even her Hollywood allies are reportedly worried about. Sources say that behind the scenes, some of her former supporters have started distancing themselves quietly, not out of disloyalty, but out of fear of being caught in the fallout, because once a court hints at procedural bad faith, the public reaction can turn brutal overnight. And that's why this hearing feels less like a step in a lawsuit and more like Judgment Day for her narrative, the moment where the veil of control slips and the truth starts speaking for itself. And the irony is that all of this could have been avoided if the initial claims had been narrower, more focused on verifiable facts instead of broad emotional framing. But as with many celebrity cases, the emotional appeal came first, the legal precision second, and now that order is coming back to haunt her. The judge's body language in previous hearings showed patience, but a growing impatience with redundant filings and overcomplicated motions. And now that he's decided to handle this one personally in open court, it suggests he's ready to cut through the noise and make a definitive ruling. And for anyone who understands how federal courts work, that's a major signal. It means the judge sees something significant enough to warrant immediate clarification, and in legal terms, that's never casual. It means something doesn't add up. The defense's filings have been crisp, direct, and data-heavy, focusing on statutory grounds, while her team's responses have leaned heavily on emotional rhetoric and appeals to fairness. That imbalance may resonate in the public arena, but in federal litigation, it rarely succeeds. And if the hearing follows the trajectory it's on, the judge's questioning will likely expose that contrast even more sharply. Imagine a courtroom where every word is live, every argument instantly analyzed by legal experts across the internet. The moment her lawyers pause or hesitate, it will be dissected frame by frame, and every facial expression will become fodder for public debate. That's the level of scrutiny awaiting them. And it's the kind of environment that doesn't favor unprepared narratives, and yet there's still a strange defiance in her filings. A tone that suggests she's banking on sympathy, both from the court and the audience, a subtle confidence that if she can control the emotion, she can weather the legal storm. But law doesn't bend for emotion, and that's why analysts are calling this the most dangerous phase of the case, the one where legal reality finally overtakes Hollywood storytelling and the outcome could redefine her public identity for years to come. Even her closest allies in the industry are starting to hedge their bets, avoiding public statements, keeping their distance because no one wants to be tied to what could become a textbook example of overreach if the judge dismisses the case. The message it sends will echo through the entertainment industry that not even celebrity influence can shield weak legal claims from scrutiny. But if by some twist she survives this motion, the case will grow exponentially more intense because the next phase would involve full discovery, including depositions of names that no one thought would ever have to speak under oath. And that's the kind of spectacle that could shake Hollywood's upper tiers for months. So either way, this hearing marks the point of no return for everyone involved. The silence before the gavel hits the air is thick with tension, and you can almost feel the awareness that whatever happens next will change everything. This isn't just about legal documents anymore. It's about power, reputation, and the uncomfortable truth that even the brightest stars can't control the narrative once the courtroom lights turn on as the countdown to October 3rd draws to a close. One undeniable truth has settled over everything. There is no turning back for anyone involved. This is no longer a quiet legal scuffle tucked away in filings and motions. It has become a full-scale reckoning for Blake Lively, for her team, for everyone who stood behind the story she built. And now that the judge has demanded transparency, the world will finally see whether that story can withstand the cold weight of law. Every delay, every footnote, every emotional plea has led to this moment. And there's no edit, no retake, no studio polish that can change what happens when the gavel falls. What's about to unfold will either vindicate her claims or expose the structural flaws that her opponents have been quietly pointing to for months. And for Hollywood, that outcome will send shockwaves, because it won't just decide one case. It will redefine how far celebrity influence can go when the truth starts pressing back. If the motion is granted, it will be an abrupt end, a brutal conclusion to a narrative that once seemed unstoppable. If it's denied, it will open the door to a discovery phase that could drag some of the biggest names in the industry into the light. Either path leads to chaos. And that's what makes this moment so gripping. The courtroom has become a mirror reflecting more than law. It reflects the cost of control, the fragility of image, and the danger of believing that fame guarantees protection. When the truth demands its day in court, and as the hearing approaches, one thing is clear: Hollywood is holding its breath, because when this verdict lands, the fallout will be impossible to contain.